stock market has been up and down, but mostly down lately. Inflation making everything more expensive, and we find out that the Federal Reserve might raise interest rates soon.
But we also find out the U.S. economy grew 5.7% last year, strongest calendar year surge since 1984 when Reagan was president. Are things really on the right track? Milton Ezrati, chief economist at Vested, is with us. Milton, thanks. So the economy is not the stock market, but most people just pay attention to the stock market. So where are we? Because it would look, according to the data, like things are moving along at a pretty good clip, but you go out and you ask people, and they'll say, oh, no, things are bad right now.
Yeah, I think where the difference is that the average American, the folks who are saying things are bad, are looking into the future, and we're looking at the current data. There are some weak spots there, too. It looks like the recovery is losing some momentum, but the real concern is inflation, and not only the inflation, but what kinds of policies the government is going to put in place to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to say, I'm not so sure that the average person is looking at the future. I think they're looking at how much is it costing them to put gas in their car, and when they
go to the grocery store.
They go to the grocery store and they buy the hamburger, and it's another 75 cents or whatever, and then they hear all this news about the economy is doing just great, and they think, well, wait a minute, I'm paying through the nose, and I can't afford to live.
Is it not my economy, in other words?
Yeah.
Well, I think what they're worried about is, I mean, they're upset because they have to float a mortgage to fill the tank in their car, whatever other their problems are. But they see that it's come up a great deal over the past year, and they're worried about the future, the new year, and they're worried about what interest rates will do. So the market is dealing with this future in much the same way that the American consumer is.
And we just have to, wait it out? Because none of these things that are going to maybe alleviate some of this are going to happen quickly.
You bet. It's going to be, if we're very lucky, it's going to be a tough pull. And the only thing worse than fighting inflation is living with it.
You know, the thing, too, about the economy is it's maybe it's too facile of a comparison, but it does remind me a bit of what's happening with the pandemic. Every time you think everything is getting maybe better, along comes something and gets worse again. And I think that's what people are thinking about the economy, that one day they read the prices are going through the roof, then they read that the market's going down, now the market is going up, the next day it's going back down again. Nobody really knows what to expect, and maybe there is no way to know.
Well, I think it's an apt comparison. There's a great deal of uncertainty. There has been with the pandemic, and there is with the economy. 6 months ago, 8 months ago, people said if we can beat this virus, or at least contain the virus, we've got an economy that's coming back. No one is sure about that. And the uncertainty itself is depressing.
Yeah, how much of a hold does COVID still have on things? Because we saw it with this latest Omicron wave, right? Fewer people were going out to the restaurants because they felt too skittish to do it, which is, a natural thing to feel. But if this wanes, then do we start to pick up steam again? We kind of ride the waves every time we see this happen.
Well, there's one good thing I got in the government report. The report was actually weaker on balance than it looked on the surface, but inventories, there was an enormous amount of inventory restocking. And that indicates to me that some of these supply shortages are beginning to dissipate, and that should help the economy in the very near term.
So what happens, though, with people who are close to retiring and they're panicking because they look at they're trying not to look at their 401ks, and they just don't know what to do?
Well, it's tough. If there's not enough money there to retire on, there's not enough money there to retire on, and that's a great burden on somebody in advanced years. A lot of people who own their own homes and bought in at low mortgage rates have a nice hedge against the inflation, but it doesn't help the cash flow when they're strapped to fill the gas tank or fill the refrigerator. People
needed help through all of this, so they were given help. But what about the argument that's out there from some that the government just, even though, bipartisan bills were passed, they just put too much stimulus into the mix, and that led us to partly where we are today?
Well, I think that's quite right. Not only was there too much immediate help to the consumers, but the Federal Reserve, which now is saying they have to deal with the inflation, has been pouring money on this economy for a long time, a lot longer than the pandemic. And I think we're paying the piper now with this inflation for that past mistake.
Well, of course, the other way of looking at it is had the government not put all that money in initially and we nosedived more than we already did for a while, right, into a deep recession, people would have been pointing fingers at the federal government saying, why didn't you do more?
Well, I think that's true. And in an emergency, the problem is we poured money in for the emergency, and then we poured more in even before we'd spent the money that was voted in the first COVID bill. So what the government was doing, it seems to me, is in the first case, it was a genuine emergency. They wanted to help people, and it was the appropriate thing for policy to do. The second wave and a lot of the talk about still more was more political theater than it was help for people who needed it, because we hadn't even exhausted the monies that were allocated in the first wave.
Well, I guess, there's the sense that everybody's going to pay off their rent, but then all of us, bought so much stuff that then we had this crunch because there wasn't enough stuff to go around. There was a lot of cash and everyone was buying stuff on the internet.
There is that, and a lot of people are still waiting for delivery on the stuff they bought.
All right. Milton Ezrati, chief economist at Vested.